Okay, that's all I know, and that's all thanks to Bagram. And Adam, who told me this yesterday, so thank you so much. I hope everyone's very excited. So let's get this started. I'm going to start with the clicker working. Okay. Okay, so taking you back to the 1960s, where you've just finished a session with your AI therapist. Now, this is not science fiction. This is actually the story of the first generative AI ever called Eliza. This was created in 1966 by Joseph Weizenbaum, a German-American computer scientist. And the goal of this program was to simulate a conversation with a psychotherapist, and it worked based on recognizing certain keywords and prompting you with things such as, tell me more about your feelings. And the goal of this project was to show how sort of shallow human-computer communications would be, right? A computer can't replace a human, except this is not what happened. Because people loved Eliza. They felt super comforted by it, and some of them even said that they preferred it to an actual therapist. So, what we really can learn from this is that humans really crave empathy and connection, even if it's from a machine that's literally built to mimic reflective reasoning. And so, these findings were so surprising to Joseph Weizenbaum that he spent the rest of his career advocating for the ethical use of AI. And he really emphasized that AI should never be used for the human domain, for replacing things that include judgment, compassion, or responsibility like fields in medicine, law, or politics. Now, obviously this was all before the new generation of generative AI and ChatGPT, and Joseph Weizenbaum isn't around anymore, but I'm not too sure if he would really enjoy what's going on with ChatGPT right now. While I'm not that controversial, I do think it's really important to talk about the importance of humanness, the importance of emotional intelligence in the age of AI. So my name is Petra Kis-Herczegh, and by the way, thank you so much for pronouncing my name so well. That doesn't happen very often, apart from my home country. So I'm a consultant and trainer, and my experience is mainly in the digital marketing field, especially focused on SEO. And I'm also currently completing my master's degree in neuroscience, where my specific interest of area of research is emotion research, which is why I'm really, really passionate to talk about emotional intelligence. So, I think there is always an aspect of talking about AI in terms of how it will impact the future of our jobs. We've already seen the, I think, 8-year-old or very young kid sort of coding better than probably any of us, things like that. So what will this really mean for us? And we constantly hear the question, is SEO dead? And no, not yet. Last week, I think John Mueller confirmed that writing SEO again and again, that it isn't dead, but it is probably going to change. But how much? Well, the latest sort of data that I found on this, it's LinkedIn research specifically, says that 68% of the skills are expected to change by 2030 due to generative AI. And to put this in a little bit of context, the last 8 years included about a 25% change. So this is quite huge. Now, if I were to have a session with Eliza now, I think this would be a time where Eliza would prompt me to tell them more about my feelings, because this is quite a big shift, and that's scary. And when we talk about AI, we always need to recognize that change is really the only certainty we have. So I put Travis Talent here, he's VP of SEO at Brainlabs. He did a talk last week at Brighton SEO about AI and how it can help with your team. So I think it's good to take note of this and have a look at it on YouTube whenever it will be up, because it was a brilliant talk. But I really wanted to focus on this change, which we are all familiar with in SEO. We all know that this is our only certainty. It doesn't make it any easier though. So I've got another reference from you. I don't know how many of you remember the Barbie movie from last year. Because Barbie's character is actually a very interesting one. And there is a cathartic moment in the movie where she goes back to Barbie Land and all the Kevins have taken over, and she basically has a mental breakdown and says that change is terrifying. And the reason why this moment is so important because this is where she's being told first time that this is actually one of the most human experiences that she could ever have. And this is really where she starts to become human, and I think it's very important that we understand that our brains are literally built to deal with change. But it is very difficult for us, and it should make us feel uncomfortable. So the next thing that an AI therapist or a regular therapist would do, and what I'm going to tell you as well, that when we are talking about this change and about these shifts, is to know that whatever you're feeling about it is valid. To feel uncomfortable, to feel scared, is actually really, really valid, but it still means that we need a strategy to deal with it. And that strategy is emotional intelligence. And unfortunately, what often happens to emotional intelligence is actually a very similar story to SEO. And it's partially because we don't really understand what it is. So it goes on our backlog, much like our SEO tickets, gets forgotten, until there is a huge problem, and then everyone's suddenly like, oh my god, we need to deal with this. And that's what happens as well. We burn out, we have a mental breakdown, it's like, maybe it's time I think about these things. So I want us to start to prioritize this and start to focus on this before there is an issue. And for that, we really need to understand what the definition of emotional intelligence is, because our current understanding is really, really outdated. And it's really because emotional intelligence is a field that mainly has been researched by psychologists and even in sort of business rather than neuroscience, and neuroscience sort of definitely chipped in later, but the popular literature is much more focused on business and sort of older psychology ideas. And the reason why it's also outdated is because our understanding of emotion itself is quite outdated. So I didn't want to put up the outdated definition, but just to sort of explain that, we usually, when we think about emotional intelligence, we think about soft skills, we think about empathy, we think about understanding our own emotions and then seeing them in other people and being able to manage them and these sort of things. There is some truth to that. I'm not saying it's completely wrong, but it's still quite inaccurate. Because emotions are really these neat little categories that we really want them to believe they are. And I'm going to demonstrate this to you by another example from Eliza, because this generative AI that was built in the 60s was called, really primitive, right? It was first of its kind, it had a few little algorithms, but it couldn't really differentiate between things like anger and hunger, for example. It didn't understand these things. And of course, if you ask ChatGPT today, it will be able to give you a definition. But I'm going to question if that's really the right thing, because especially we are talking about anger and hunger and differentiations between them, the interesting thing is that humans really can't differentiate between these two. And I picked anger and hunger specifically because there is a very famous phenomenon called the hungry judge effect, or the hangry judge effect. So those of you who are not English speakers, hangry with an A is a combination of hungry and angry put together, and we use it in English-speaking countries to describe an increasing frustration that comes over a person when they are feeling really hungry, right? So it's really a mix. Now, this phenomenon refers to an actual behavior that was observed several times in the courtroom, where judges actually give much harsher decisions. They can sentence a criminal much worse before they had their meal break. Like, that is quite alarming. And what it should just tell us that our physiology impacts our mental processes. And again, this is not just observed in the courtroom. This is well known from cognitive sort of fatigue, and hunger and tiredness can be easily measured. So we know that these would impact how well we can make decisions, how impulsive we are, for example. And it's good to be aware of that. But this is just one aspect. Of course, if this would be a thing where judges are making their decisions only based on this, that would be a very, very big problem. So it's not quite as clear-cut as the effect calls it. Because also biases impact our mental processes. So biases that are kind of like shortcuts for your brain, right? So based on your experiences, your physical and social environment, the values you learn, the beliefs you learn, they create these biases and they influence your mental processes all the time. So does the weather. I mean, I think quite a few of us flew in from much rainier and grayer countries to come here, and maybe found that when they woke up this morning, the beautiful sunshine just really made them feel like this is going to be a much easier day to decide on things and, just make decisions. And except, of course, if you're one of the speakers like me, because for me, this moment will come after I've delivered my talk. But basically, all I'm trying to say here is that decision-making is very, very complex. And the reason I want to emphasize this is because in marketing specifically, we love mapping out the user journey and the decision tree and awareness stages. And it's all great, but a lot of my job as a consultant, I realized, is to go to businesses and remind them that the spreadsheet that they are looking at is like, it's actual people, that's human beings. It's not just these numbers where you can put together that A goes to B and then B goes to C. It's way more complex than that. And I'm not going to ask you to wait for a neuroscience agreement on decision making, because if we were to wait for that, we might be waiting a while. That might take several more decades if it ever happens. So of course, your SEO strategies probably can't wait that long, so we do have to use these models. But just be aware. Be aware that none of them are perfect, and we are dealing with very, very complex human beings. And for that, I also want us to understand a little bit how our brains work and how they don't work so. Because how our brains work is, again, something that we will probably still spend decades researching. But how they don't work is very interesting, because they are not either rational or either emotional. This kind of belief that we have rational thinking and emotional thinking is very, very popular, but probably one of the best explanations to think about this is that your brain's main job is not to think. Thinking is a byproduct that it does in order to just keep you alive, because that's what its main function is. And this whole rational and emotional thing is not like a layered brain, it's all intertwined. And rationality is really a feeling. It's a feeling of comfort that you have with your own logic and reasoning, which also means that other people's rationality is really your ability to understand their reasoning. Emotion is part of how we reason, and it's always part of the process. This is why a lot of times you would hear that we are encouraged to use storytelling when you're trying to get business buy-in, because that's very emotional and that's very relatable, and it can really help people to associate with your topic. Data never sells anything. It's the stories that do, it's the relationships that we make that do. And emotions are actually constructs. We create them through learning. They are highly unique and personal to our experiences. And one thing that really plays a big part in it is culture and the language we speak. And I don't think I really need to convince anyone here that that's true, because probably majority of you have worked in international teams and have come across sort of the misunderstandings that come from trying to communicate with another person from another culture, with another language. I'm from Eastern Europe, from Hungary. It was quite a shock to my system to meet British politeness and passive aggressiveness for the first few years. In Eastern Europe, we're much more direct and assertive, I would say. So I always say this, that I moved to the UK, I spoke basic English, I could get by, I could get a job, all of those things. It took me years to learn the language in a way that I can express myself and not just what I want. And that's a big difference. So this is also because emotions have no biological universality. They are mainly learned similarities. And what that means is that when researchers try to look at emotions and look for, like, let's see what happiness looks like in people, let's see what sadness looks like in people, it's not exactly the same. There will be similarities because we learn the similarities through sharing experiences, but it's not something that just gets triggered in us and takes over. And it's also important to understand that our brain is wired to constantly change and adapt. So, of course, one of the things when thinking about emotion research is that it's so complex and it's so unique. Like, how are we ever going to understand each other? Like, my idea of happiness is completely different to yours. My idea of happiness now is completely different from when I was a child. Like, how can we ever be on the common ground? Well, we can be, because our brains are built that way. Our brains are built to change and adapt and learn how we understand things and how other people understand things. And that's called neuroplasticity, and that's something that happens throughout your whole life, where your brain literally reshapes some of those connections that are made to make sure that it's best suited for your environment. Which means our emotions also constantly change and adapt. So I propose that when we think about emotional intelligence, we think about it this way. We think about it in a way that refers to our ability to understand and reflect on the relationships we have with ourselves and our environment. So it's really more about how do we fit in and what role we play in our environment. And this is the thing that will really help us to deal with change and thrive in our uncertainty. Now, let's get back to the 68% of skills are changing, because that is really the part that we want to make sure that we are approaching the right way. So, skills again are something that, because of this misunderstanding with emotional intelligence, we often, when we think about skills that change, we think about them as like, right, I've got my soft skills here, my hard skills there, it's a list, some of these will go, there will be some new ones popping up. It's not a really good way to think about it. So I really want us to think about it more something like this, where you have them as two verticals, right? And your skills are sitting there, and none of these will be statistical representations. It's all just visualization. But the 68% change would be something like this, right? So they just shift. Your skills just shift. It's not a tick box exercise where you have to learn something completely new you've never ever met before. And that's why I really want everyone to focus on their transferable skills. Transferable skills such as creativity and storytelling, critical thinking, and self-awareness and motivation. And guess what? All of those need that emotional intelligence that's going to be really, really powerful to help you learn anything new. And also, before I move on, because I don't have too much time, if anybody wants to talk to me after about specific practical examples on like how you improve these skills working with AI, I also have some examples for that. But I want to give you the core learning in terms of how you use this emotional intelligence to collaborate with AI. And again, for that, I'm going to go back to Eliza one last time. Because the interesting learning from Eliza hasn't changed that much. And what that was is that we are perfectly fine with AI solutions. So there is no question if like AI content is good or bad. It's perfectly fine for people as long as they fulfill our needs. So that just really means that we shouldn't be thinking about it in a way that is the content itself good or bad. We should be thinking about it more from a user perspective. And the added layer on that just because the users like it, it still doesn't mean it's good. Because we as humans overestimate and trust the value of things we like, and we underestimate and don't trust the value of things we don't like. We are really biased in that sense, right? So how do we make sure that we approach this the right way? Well, this is a quote from Lazarina, who will be talking later. Collaboration across different sectors is key, as is transparent communication about AI's potential and limitations. And I think this is really, really key, that communication, and also I want to really emphasize on the limitations to make sure that we are staying critical in the process. So the last thing I have for you today is to talk about the elements of AI that we can replace and what we can enhance. And in general, as a rule, I would say only replace what you know really, really well. And that doesn't tend to be the natural way how we maybe want to go, because we'd rather replace what's really, really challenging and hard, and we just don't really want to do it. But actually, those are the things we should enhance, and we should collaborate with AI to work on them. Because if we mix this up, mistakes can happen. And I'm going to translate this example to you because it's from Hungary, but I'm sure you meet with this example here in Turkey as well. So when you replace what should be enhanced, it can be really damaging, and translations and internationalization is a great example of that. So this campaign is for a skincare brand, and it was an AI-translated campaign that's going across several countries. And the actual English says, viral K-beauty products are available on our K-Sisters website. Now, unfortunately, Hungarians don't really use viral as a term. I mean, if we use it in English. But if you literally translate it, which they've done, what this says is, the products that have viruses in them are now available on our website. That's not very good for your brand. So that human element is very, very important. Which is why I really encourage everyone to think of AI as a collaborator rather than delegating to it. Remember that emotional intelligence is simply our human intelligence that we really need to tap into and emphasize. Because at the end of the day, we work together with AI technology. AI technology is rooted in its human creation, and AI technology is influencing how we behave in the future. So we really need to make sure that we don't forget about this side and this element of it. And that's everything from me today. Thank you so much. Thank you for that.
So much.